Test. Test 1, 2, 3. Test, test. Oh yeah. Yes. The tech is working. This is my favorite part of the day when everything seems to be going just fine. Alright, I just posted the question. What are you planting this week? Okay, so happy Saturday, everybody. I got my coffee. Grab some coffee because we got quite a bit to talk about today, or at least I have a lot to report on what happened last week, what's going to be happening this week, and then kind of I'm making a standard to these shows now, or the live streams, to where talk about what happened last week, what happens next week, and then kind of a show and tell on plants or what I got growing that's fascinating to look at. So this weekend I have something a little bit different for the plant show and tell. I have been doing a series on the perennial plants, so that's been exciting because I mentioned this story a couple weekends ago, but I've only been working with perennial plants for a few years now, and 2 years ago I ended up uh, accidentally killing most of my strawberries. In fact, it was just about all of them, including some fruit trees and some other plants. I did have them cover up outside, but after I thought about it, because I've been knocked down so many times, and if you've gardened or grown for any amount of time, you realize that it can be uh, seems a really it can be really disheartening when you've invested so much of your time and resources into growing plants and then just get the rug pulled out from underneath you. So I'm kind of used to that. But I always ask myself, why did this happen? Or is there something that I can improve upon? Because this is how I've been able to get to this point in growing, is just learning from past failures. So if you have an aversion to failure, then this might not. Oh, we got a neighbor going by. This might be a rough road for you, but that's okay. Just like anything else, if it doesn't kill us, that makes us stronger. So anyway, last couple of weeks I've been showing the perennial plants. I have raspberries are coming back. I have multiple raspberry varieties. I got 4 varieties. I also have rhubarb, and this is something I wanted to mention too. So that year that I had a bunch of a massive loss of perennial fruits, I did have them covered up here in Minnesota. But when I was reflecting to see what I could do better on improving the odds of those plants surviving in grow bags, I realized that we've had a very dry winters for the last few years here in Minnesota. And traditionally in Minnesota, even when it gets super cold, so we're zone 4B here, I don't think that's adjusted. I know some of the hardness zones have been updated over the last few years to reflect changes in temperatures, but we're still zone 4B, so that means we're getting minus 20 Fahrenheit in the winters at the lows. Uh, Having said that, that's not a huge deal for perennials that grow here, like that oak tree behind me, because we typically have snow on the ground. And as crazy as it sounds, that blanket of snow is actually a blanket, so that helps insulate everything that's underneath the ground. So even though I had my perennial fruiting plants like strawberries and rhubarb and raspberries and fruit trees wrapped up, I use roll covers and frost blankets, multiple layers, and I've done that in the past too. But I ended up losing a lot of them. I think what happened was that we just didn't have that layer of snow on top to provide that insulation. So I lost a lot of strawberries, and it the story isn't over there. I actually, before we went into winter, I had taken cuttings from all the runners. So if you haven't grown strawberries before, part of the vegetative stage of a strawberry plant is it'll send out runners, and that's how it propagates, or one way it propagates. So I had already cut off all the runners, and I had planted the new daughter plants into trays, and I had those inside my insulated shop on that side of the house. Those all survived. So now the few hundred strawberry plants I have today, those aren't the original ones I purchased from the big wholesale nurseries. Those are actually the daughters of the plants that I accidentally killed. So um, that there's a silver line to that story, but that's what I've been talking about the last couple of weeks was the perennial plants. So today it's going to be a little bit different. I don't have any perennials to show, but we have something a little bit different on the plant show and tell. So this last week is a big push. Lots of cool season plants that I transplanted into grow bags. So those include different lettuce varieties. I try to hit the major lettuce variety groups, and people have their favorites or their tastes. So when I think about the lettuce groups out there, you can think of like the romaine lettuce. That's the vase shaped lettuce where it kind of grows upright. That's a popular one for tacos. That's what we use for our taco nights. You could use lettuce wraps for that too. Those work very well in grow bags. I grow those 3 plants in a 3-gallon grow bag. They're spaced perfect for that setup, and they don't they're not fussy, so they don't need a whole lot. If you've seen my videos prior, I front load the plants journey throughout the season. So I use slow release fertilizer, get the 3 romaine lettuce plants in a 3-gallon bag, and then once they get transplanted to that, I don't have to touch the soil again until that plant is going to seed, which is typically a couple of months. And it really depends on the weather. So if you see behind me, everything's green. It wasn't that green last week. It was gray and rainy, and actually it's trying to rain right now, but I think we're gonna get through it without any water. But that's okay. So romaine lettuce is one. Leaf lettuce is the second one. So leaf lettuce, I typically do 1 leaf lettuce plant per 3-gallon bag again, because the leaf lettuce it doesn't grow upright. It kind of spreads out. So that works perfectly for a 3-gallon grow bag. So that's the second one. And then the third one is the butterhead lettuce. Those are the ones that have the very savory leaves. They kind of look like a rosette when they're coming up. And that and the romaine are my 2 popular types of lettuce that I get requests for with the instant pop-up gardens. So they all work well in a 3-gallon bag or a container. Just know that if you are going to grow lettuce in a container, make sure that the container fits that plant. So if you have a 3-gallon terracotta plant, you can use the same rules for those lettuce plants as I do with the grow bags. So last week was Big Lettuce Week. I was continuing the other cool season plants too, transplanting those. Also cool season edible flowers. So that's one of my favorite things is education. Not everybody knows that like a pansy is edible. And that was one of my conversations this last week was a potential client of mine. I saw that they had done or planted some pansies. I said, "Oh, those are edible," and she had no idea. So that's part of the fun of what I do is education, because a lot of the plants that we interact with on a day-to-day basis, or you might see in your landscape, or even like violas, Johnny jump ups just popping up in your yard, those are totally edible. So those are also the plants that I was transplanting this week. So Johnny jump ups, violas. Another cool season edible flower that I transplanted last week that works well for this time of the year is calendula. Calendula does very well in the months of May and June. Typically, June is when it gets to the point where it's putting the flowering stage. When we get to the heat of the summer or July 4th, that's usually when that plant starts to struggle, and it'll typically, if it's already produced flowers, it'll go to seed, and then that plant is done. So calendula, cool season plants, even in Minnesota, how far north we are, that one does well this time of year. When it gets to the heat of the summer, that one's usually done. The cool thing with these edible flowers and sort of how I set up my plant nursery for my instant gardens is it's taken me years to kind of figure this out. But if you hear people talking about plant succession, so traditionally, if you're in a raised bed or in the ground, when we talk about plant succession, that means like a plant, let's say a lettuce plant that you plant now in your ground or raised bed, that's going to last for probably about 2 months. That'll be finished, so it'll go to seed, and then that plant's going to be removed, and then you're going to plant something in its place. So I do the same thing with containers, and you could totally do this with containers if that's what you have. If you have a small patio, or maybe you're in an apartment and you don't have room for a raised bed, you can do this in containers too. So a couple examples I have are that calendula again. So calendula, I transplanted that this week. In a couple months, that's going to be done when we get to the heat of the summer. But at the end of June or sometime in June, that's when I'm going to transplant the sunflowers. So I'll actually start my sunflower seeds next month. When the calendula is done, that's coming out and the sunflowers are going into the bags. So that's kind of a one-for-one example for edible flowers. I do the same thing for other vegetable fruiting plants. So sugar snap peas, I have a bunch of those out in the hoop house right now. I started those over a month ago, so they're already about this big in their grow bags. I use 7-gallon square grow bags for those. It works very well. And then this week, what I'm going to be doing is using these. I referenced these in past videos, but I wanted to show you what I do. So if you have any old fencing that looks kind of like this, so you got maybe 3-inch by 3-inch squares. This was like a whole roll of fencing that I had laying around years ago. I wasn't going to use it because I have no purpose for it, but I suddenly realized that I could totally use this for climbing plants like sugar snap peas. So I look for smaller, or I look for sugar snap pea varieties that aren't going to get crazy out of control as far as size wise. So a couple of those varieties I use are Sugar Ann, and I think I have, let me dig around. Oh yeah, Sugar Ann. So I get my Sugar Ann seeds from Johnny's. So Sugar Ann, those do very well in grow bags. So again, 7-gallon square grow bags or 10-gallon. I don't like to go higher than 10-gallon grow bags because at that point the weight of the bag gets pretty heavy, even for a grow bag. So try to stop at a 10-gallon for most of my plants. But when the Sugar Ann or other snap pea varieties that I have get to be about where they're at right now, about 6 inches tall, that's when the tendrils start to come out of the plants. And then that's when these go in. So these just sit in that square grow bag, and then the sugar snap peas can grab onto that fence, and then they can continue to grow. So the Sugar Ann, they'll get to be about 2.5, 3 feet tall, the plants, the vines, and then that's usually about where they tap out. So I do a couple successions of sugar snap peas too. So I got the first round. I'm gonna be putting the fencing into the bags this week, and then that's all I have to do for that plant. When I do my checkups daily, if I see a couple of those sugar snap pea vines like kind of crossing or getting really close to each other, that's the time where I'll kind of reroute it. But once it latches onto that fencing, it kind of does its thing, and then after that point is just monitoring water and then making sure there's no other problems like pests or disease. And honestly, this time of year in Minnesota, don't have a lot of problems with pests or disease with sugar snap peas. So that's kind of a good thing. As we progress through this growing season this year, I'll definitely be talking more about the pests and disease, because even though we're in a colder climate, depending on how the summer goes, if it goes dry or if we have a wet, humid summer, that's gonna determine what type of pest or disease we have. And I've been growing long enough in Minnesota to where I can tell you that If we have a dry, hot summer, that brings out certain pests and disease. And if we have a hot, humid summer, that's gonna bring out some other types of pests and diseases. So anyway, that's sugar snap peas for this week. I also yesterday I wanted to tell you about something that I started because as crazy as this sounds, like last week it was not this green behind me, and I already have to think about warm season plant crops. So here in Minnesota where we're at, we have typically about 115, 120 frost-free days for the summer, and every year it can vary a little bit, but that's kind of a average 115 to 120 days. What that means is we have kind of a condensed summer growing season. I mentioned this a couple of weekends ago, but certain plants have different thresholds on when they start to grow. So for cool season plants, let me turn this up. How's that for? I just turned my slider up. I appreciate you letting me know about the volume. There you go. I'll be planting raised beds in adapted, improved. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I'll be planting raised beds in an adapted hugelculture method. Nice. I've heard that term. I don't know a whole lot about it. That's something I'm gonna be in the car ride for the next 2 hours, so I think I'm gonna be pulling up some YouTube videos. But yeah, that's exciting. And this is my favorite part about reaching out or learning about other growers is that there's so many different methods of growing, and there's so many people that have had years or even decades of different growing methods, and they've had successful results. So I built a business around grow bags. There's other companies that have built businesses around doing edible landscaping, as far as doing grow bed installations or food forests, uh, food guilds, so like mini orchards you can think of that. But that's one of my favorite parts of this whole journey is just learning about other types of growing methods and how people have been successful in growing that. But okay, back to what I was saying. So even though we're still in cool season, or we just kind of started the cool season planting in Minnesota here, really in the last couple of weeks, I already have to be thinking about summer plants, because the reality is, I've mentioned this in past videos, is that when we get to the end of May into early June here in Minnesota, it's very possible that we could already have 90 days. I mean, even within the last 2 weeks, we've had mid 80s for Minnesota, and you think about that, we've been freezing at night or some of those days, and then now we're getting up these crazy swings. So I always say, like, this time of year we're kind of on this crazy roller coaster for the temperature. But that's all to say that I have to be thinking, and I would encourage you too to be thinking about what you're going to be doing for your summer plants. Because a lot of those summer plants, like this one right here, this is one I wanted to share with. Bush Slicer from Renee's Garden. I actually started a couple of flats of cucumbers here yesterday. So a lot of these plant packets, they have pretty good information on the back on most of these. The non-commercial, so the more do-it-yourself seed companies like Renee's versus the Johnny's, you can see the difference on these Johnny seed packets. This is more like a bag. There's not as much information on here. Now, if you go to the Johnny's website, they do have a lot more information, but bags like this of seeds are more for the professional or the larger customer, so there's not going to be as much helpful information on there. But if you're a DIY home gardener, you'll have plenty of information on here. One of the things to look out on plants like this, on cucumbers, is I was just starting to say that there's a minimum threshold for growth. So cool season plants, like I was mentioned about those pansies, violas, lettuce, then you get into your brassicas like the broccolis, the cabbages. There's a minimum threshold temperature. So even though those plants may be frost tolerant, you might see that on a seed packet. they're not actually going to do much in the way of growing unless the minimum threshold temperature is met, and that's 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's just a rule of thumb to keep in mind. 40 degrees. On your warm season plants like cucumbers, tomatoes, peppers, watermelon, anything that's going to be traditional summer uh, crop or summer plant, minimum threshold is 50 degrees. So I'm bringing this all back together. So we've had crazy temperature swings here lately. At the end of next month into June, we could very well have 90 degrees. So I have to start. I'm starting my cucumbers right now because I want those to be flowering and fruiting when we get into July, and they will. But I got to start them now. By the time we get to the end of May, we'll have the overnight lows 50 degrees. So that's a good rule of thumb for where I'm at. It's going to be different depending on where you are geographically. But for me, usually the first week of June, our overnight consistent lows for temperatures are 50 degrees. If we have some type of freak cool swing there, that's okay. I could just keep the cucumber plants inside the indoor nursery a week longer, then start to take them outside to get them used to the summer craziness roller coaster. Look to Nature Homestead. Nice to see you. We will also be having crazy temperature swings the next couple of weeks. Yeah, I. That's been amazing to hear like different different geographic locations in the lower 48 and then up in Canada too. It seems like we're all affected by these wild temperature swings right now. 2 more nights and we'll be above 45. Yeah, yeah. So anyway, back to the cucumbers. So that's what I'm doing. I just started a couple flats of cucumbers. This bush slicer, I wanted to show you that too. This is one of my staple cucumbers that I do in 7-gallon grow bags. It's it's a mad production cucumber plant. That one, the first year that I started that for my customers, that I got like uh, overwhelming amount of positive feedback. So that told me that this plant's staying. I'm gonna continue to grow this one. Some of the other cucumber varieties that I'm growing are, this is the English cucumber, so it's called Tasty. It's a hybrid. Just real quick on the hybrids. If you hear somebody say you can't save seeds from the hybrids, that's not entirely true. Just don't expect it to look exactly like the parents. So that's one of the English cucumbers I do. I've had really good luck with those in the grow bags. Again, all the cucumbers that I grow here for the MEG, they're in 7-gallon grow bags. Here's another one for pickling called Petite Pickles. These ones will start off small, but they'll get to be like a pretty good size pickling cucumber if you let them grow out. So don't let the name fool you. Even though it says Petite Pickles, it could be they could put out pretty good sized pickles. And then last fall, I used 2 of these plants. Oh yeah, I should tell you too, just what to expect, because a lot of these seed packets don't always tell you what to expect as far as production on the plant. So again, with my plants, when I set them up in the grow bags containers and then they get shipped off to my customer, I front load them with slow release fertilizer, and then all we have to do is monitor the water and pest and disease, right? So, but with the slow release fertilizer, I started using that at the beginning of this business because I want to take as many variables out of the picture as possible to set my customers up for success. But like I said, one thing that isn't always shown as far as like production is the amount of cucumbers you're going to get. So back with this bush slicer, per plant, so 7-gallon container, this plant right here, you can expect to get close to 2 dozen cucumbers over the life of this plant, which sounds insane, and it is, but that's also the reason why I grow this plant is right here. So as long as that plant is healthy, you can expect close to 2 dozen cucumbers over the life of that plant. That's that one. So the petite pickles, you could expect a lot more than that. So as long as the plant's healthy, this one we're pushing now 30, maybe even 3 dozen pickling cucumbers. Again, as long as it's getting enough water and pests and diseases are staying away. I got to get to the chat here because there's a bunch of questions. See, Pennsylvania 6B and 7A zone here. Thanks for reminder. I need a direct sow my kook state. Yep. 6A in Canada, slightly different garden zones from C. Yes, I actually just learned that here recently. I didn't because I was curious. I've been bumping into or noticing a lot more Canadian gardeners on YouTube. It's probably just the algorithms are pushing more Canadian YouTube channels to me, and that's fine. But I just realized I found out recently that the garden zones are a little bit different, so that's okay. I mean, it's the same thing like the metric system up there and the King's measuring system down here, so it's just a little different. That's all right. Any tips for gardeners who are lousy at growing cucumbers? That's a great question. I have so I'm gonna give you some advice from my own standpoint and my own learning curve on how I got better at growing cucumbers. I started growing. I planted my first garden in 2006, so I just dated myself, and that's okay. But that year was a huge learning lesson for me because I learned a whole lot of stuff. I learned where the sun is, so the sun's coming up right over there right now. I learned that I need to pay attention where the sun is, and I need to pay attention to how that sun travels through our sky throughout the season. I, and that's to say that where that sun is right now, or the morning sun, midday sun, and then afternoon sun, that's not going to be the position in the sky here in 2 months, or even a month from now. It's going to be a different position of the sky. I didn't really. It's something that, oh yeah, it makes sense, but when you start growing plants and then those plants are in a in-ground garden, which I had at the time was an in-ground garden, once you plant that seed or you transplant that plant and it puts roots out, it's it's very difficult to move that plant without doing a lot of damage to the plant. So had I been thinking about the position of the sun today versus where it's going to be in a couple of months, I would have picked a different location for that garden. But that wasn't the only problem, because that was problem number one. We had a garage that was close to where that garden was. The second problem was I wasn't paying attention to the sticks behind me. So you can see the oak trees behind me. They're just starting to put on some foliage. And then over here, we have a bunch of, I'm trying to not point off the screen. These right here, these are all a bunch of maple trees. So the maple trees, if that's what we had at that house in 2006, I would have been able to say like, oh, I should probably not plant the garden here. And you could probably figure out what happened. So what happened was we had a pear tree and an apple tree that looked like these oak trees here that didn't have any foliage this time of the year. I planted corn, beans, and I don't remember what the third thing was, but they all germinated. They looked fine until the apple tree and the pear tree looked more like this maple tree over here, and then the sunlight was gone. So as soon as the foliage on those trees came on, that's the garden like choked off. And then on top of that, even if I didn't have the pear and apple tree, I still would have been in trouble, because as the sun, like I said, as the arc of that sun changes in relative to the time of year, the garage that was next to it would have finished it off anyway. So that garden was a learning lesson. It and I could have been completely discouraged and rage quit, but I wanted to improve and get better. So that would be my first advice from my own pain and learning, is that pay attention to where the sun is in relationship to everything. So in relationship to trees, in relationship to if you have a shed or a garage or a house, or maybe a neighbor wants to put up a garden shed. And I've had this happen before with neighbors too, where I had cranberries and they were in a great spot. Neighbor decides to put like a 8 foot tall tool shed right over, and that's tough because I can't tell my neighbor like, you can't put it's their property, they could do whatever they want with it. So this is all to say is the sunlight. So I pay attention definitely to where the sun is, it's another positive and another great aspect of growing in containers, especially grow bags, because if you have this scenario where something changes that's out of your control, like a neighbor putting up a building, then you could simply move the grow bag. Or here in Minnesota or in a northern climate, if you have extreme weather, so we had a crazy thunderstorm that rolled through here a couple weeks ago, or if you have a late frost or you have an early frost in the fall, you could simply pick up that container and move it inside. So sunlight's a big one. From my experience too, from my hardships and pain, also with cucumbers, this is when I first started my raised bed. So I told you about the first experience about the sunlight, not paying attention to that. The next attempt was at our last house. It was a new construction. All the topsoil was scraped off the property, and you've probably heard me talk about this before. I really feel like topsoil should be left at new construction sites. I think it should almost be a crime for contractors to completely remove topsoil, because it puts the new homeowner in a really bad spot. So I'm gonna do this or cover this topic in a different video, but just know that when you're talking about soil, if the topsoil is completely removed and you want to grow a vegetable garden, including cucumbers or really anything, you're going to have a really tough time. Even if you want to grow sod or grass, which a lot of suburban homes, new homes, they're sold with nice brand new sod. After that sod starts to get established, it's going to struggle because there's no topsoil. So all your nutrients, they disappeared. So what I did was a lot of new homeowners do is I went vertical with raised beds, because that's really the option unless you want to truck in truck after truck of topsoil, and that gets expensive. So we were blessed in here in our local town where we have a community compost. So this is another advice too, is if you look for or Google search in your local municipality or community, you might have a local composting facility that's run. It could be a private run one, or it could be a city owned one. Ours was a city owned one, and what that meant was that it was free compost. So you could bring your yard waste there in the fall or throughout the year, and then you could shovel in your own compost. So the next thing with cucumbers is water. So when I did that first raised bed, I severely underestimated how much vegetable garden plants require for water. I just figured, well, we get rain every once in a while here in Minnesota. It'll just kind of take care of itself. But that's not exactly how the weather works, and especially since we're talking about extreme crazy weather patterns. What happened is the plants started off fine. I'd go water them every once in a while, and then when we got to the heat of the summer, we have a dry summer. The cucumbers or the tomatoes, they didn't look well. They weren't thriving. They were surviving, but they weren't thriving. So for cucumbers, and you could think of other plants too that you grow, the larger the leaf space. So with cucumbers, you're gonna see leaves that get this big. With zucchini, especially when you got leaves this big, the larger the leaf space, the larger the fruit, the more water that plant is gonna require. So that's a very good rule of thumb that I've paid attention to, that I would advise you to think about too, is wherever you put these plants, if it's in the ground, if it's in the raised bed, or if it's a container, the larger the leaf area, the larger the fruit, the more water that plant's going to require. And it's going to require different volumes of water at different points of its life. So when it's in its vegetative stage, so you have a seedling, not going to be a lot of water usage. When it gets to the rapid growth stage, it's going to take a lot more water because it's growing, especially with cucumbers. That's one of my favorite parts about cucumber plants, is that you can go in the morning and then you come back in the evening to check on your plants, and you swear that plant's grown this much. It probably has, actually. And then the next morning, it's like, man, this it's very cool because you get that instant feedback. But again, larger the leaf area, it's going to transpire more water. It's also, you just think about this plant, this cucumber plant, and that's what I love about growing, is that these are biomechanical machines. So when I started studying plants and how they operate, I'm a techie brain as it is. I went to school for automotive technology originally, so I love techie stuff. When I figured out that plants are biomechanical machines, I was instantly hooked because that's what they are. They're biomechanical machines, and I intend to talk more about this in the future because it's very exciting when you start talking about how a plant actually operates. But as far as the cucumber, when you think about it, it's transpiring more water, and then your fruits are larger. So those cucumbers, they're going to be a lot of water in those cucumbers. So you imagine like you're kind of blowing up a water balloon. So if you have a cucumber this big, that's a ton of water that it needs every day. So that's something that I've learned, that I could say from my past is these vegetables, fruiting plants, they are, are going to require more water than you think they do, especially in grow bags, especially in raised beds. In the ground is going to be a little bit different, different growing, uh, different growing conditions. But for the cucumber by itself, it's going to require a lot of water. So that's that. And then now nutrition, because this is another thing. So like I said, I front load my plants. I front load my plants with slow release fertilizer, and I think it was last week or 2 weeks I showed some of the types of fertilizer I use. They sell them at most of the retail garden centers, the big box stores like the Lowe's and Home Depots and Menards of the world. They'll have a slow release fertilizer. I use Osmocote, so that's the brand name. I get it in 50-pound bags because I get it from a horticulture little supplier or wholesaler. So I get big bags, but it's the same stuff that you'll get at the big box stores or your retail nurseries. The cool thing about that is that if you follow the instructions, they have really good detailed instructions on the amounts to use. And even if you're using a container, they typically, if you get the one that's marketed for vegetables and fruits, they'll have a section in there on, it'll have the measurement. So you can figure out if you have like a 7-gallon container on how much fertilizer you should be putting there. So the cucumbers, I front load the cucumbers when I first transplant that cucumber into the grow bag, and then all I have to worry about after that is water. So just making sure the plant gets this water. And I've set my business up so I don't really have to guess on water. I have a flooded tray method. So I have all the grow bags sitting in a shallow tray, and they have water. They take up as much water as they need, and then I don't have to think about it. The only other thing I have to think about is, again, pest and disease, which that's a separate subject that I won't talk about today. And then also with the cucumbers, I always think about how large is this plant going to get. So there's a couple ways you could do that too. I've grown them both ways where I let them kind of spread out on the ground. But with my customers and what I do with my business, I like to go vertical. So that's something, be a good idea to think about before you get to that. When we get to the summer, is just how do I want this plant? Because if you let it go horizontal, it's probably gonna take up about 6 feet or so, depending on which way the vines run. But if you go vertical and you have a 7-gallon grow bag, you're only taking up basically a little over a square foot on the bags that I use. So you can get a lot of cucumbers from a tiny space, if you have like a small patio or deck or maybe a apartment condo or whatnot. So slow release fertilizer at the top, and then I've noticed with certain cucumber varieties like the bush slicer, not so much with the petite pickles, but also the F1 cucumbers, is that these plants will kind of go in waves. So what that means is we'll go through the stages of the cucumber life cycle where plant the seed. I have them in nursery trays. They'll go through that stage. I transplant the seedling out to the grow bags as I'm already getting the slow release fertilizer mixed in. That plant's gonna go through its normal vegetative stage, then flowering stage, and then fruiting stage. Once it gets past that fruiting stage, that plant's gonna kind of do a reset. So you might see, or from my experience with these, I'll see some of the bigger leaves kind of like senesce, or they'll just kind of turn yellow and die. But the plant's not finished yet. So this is the cool thing about some of these plant varieties, like these again these bush slicers, and this is how I can get so many cucumbers out of one plant. Is that let's say we get about a dozen cukes off of this harvest, the plant kind of goes through a little reset, and then it's going to go through another wave of growing the vine out. It'll flower again, and it'll fruit again. And we do have enough time here in Minnesota to get multiple waves of cucumbers off of one plant. So even like if I have 3 of these plants here at the house just for our own family, that's a lot of cucumbers just off of one. And like I was mentioned earlier, I got multiple varieties. So um, out of all the plants that I do, as far as like biggest bang for buck and biggest bang for square footage, cucumbers are a fantastic option from my experience. So when that plant goes through its reset phase, that's when I'm top dressing with more slow release fertilizer. There's a couple other things too. There's some nuanced stuff too with containers. Is that depending on our weather, if we get a lot of heavy rainstorms, it can leach a lot of the fertilizer out of the grow bag or the container. So I like the top dress. I won't put the same quantity of slow release fertilizer in when the plant is going through its reset phase. I usually do like a quarter of it. So it's basically like a tablespoon of 14, 14, 14 is what I'm putting in. That's enough for the plant to get enough nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and then it can go through its second wave. And then it's happy, and then we're happy because we're getting another dozen or so cucumbers. So um, that's how I grow the cucumbers and how they kind of set up throughout the year. And then I got one last cucumber I want to share with you. It's a staple. This is a fun one for kids too. So if you have kids, this because not every they don't sell these in the supermarkets, or at least I have never seen them in the supermarket. And the first year I grew them, I was as instantly hooked because it's just a very cool plant. But it's a lemon cucumber. So this is an heirloom too, so you can save the seeds and they'll grow true to type. So that's one of my favorite ones. Kids love them. The lemon cucumbers will get to the size of about a baseball, and they got a different flavor than a traditional slicing cucumber or a pickling cucumber. I like to eat them on sandwiches, so I'll cut them up thin and throw them on a fresh sandwich. They're also good to eat just raw, so that's the cool thing about the lemon cucumbers is they have a different flavor. They look cool. Kids love them. They're just a great one. These ones will produce as much as the petite pickle. So one plant, as long as it's healthy and it has what it needs, you can expect. I mean, you could probably get closer to 3 dozen cucumbers out of one plant. One plant in one 7-gallon grow bag, which sounds insane, but they do very well. They're very prolific. Yep, round and yellow. Let's see. I gotta get back to the chats here. Managing cucumber beetles using integrated pest management requires combination early monitors, physical barriers, and cultural controls. Yeah. Row covers. I I've said row covers so much. I absolutely love row covers. Row covers are a fantastic tool, inexpensive tool as part of that IPM. The great thing is I don't like to use any type of chemical pesticides if I can help it. And even if I do, uh, it's gonna be organic certified. And really, the stuff that I'm using like insecticidal soap, which sounds bad, but it's really not. But most of the pests that I can control are using a floating row cover. And floating row covers actually work for other pests too, like four-legged animals, even like bunnies, dogs, squirrels, deer. The floating row cover is kind of camouflage, so if they can't see it, they don't know what's behind it. And I'll have one caveat on here. I'll have one caveat on here. Uh, it's buffering. Yeah, I can't really control the buffering because we're out in the middle of we're between 80 acres and corn, and I think they're doing soybeans on that side this year. They might do corn, but yeah, if it's buffering, I apologize. That's just we're out on in the rural part of the Minnesota. Um, Castile wedding agent, nice. Yeah. Anyway, roll covers, absolutely love roll covers, and roll covers are really they're inexpensive compared to other options. So I love those. I have another option too since I have container growing. Is if I do have problems with anything creepy crawly, I'll go vertical. So I if you see on my website or any of the other videos, you'll see raised beds with containers or grow bags in them. Those are false grow bags, or excuse me, false grow beds. So they'll look like a grow bed, like a cedar galvanized grow bed. But what you don't see is I actually have 2x4 stilt structure on the inside, and then the trays sit on top of that. So there's no soil in there. It's just I call it a false grow bag. It's really something to make it look nice. And then since the grow bags are recessed into the grow bed, you don't see the grow bags. You just see the plants growing up out of it. So if you're walking by like a city street and you saw one of my customers' gardens, you'd say, "Oh, it looks a little odd because the plants are so close together, but it's a false grow bed. There's no soil in it. It's a very cool wrapping or package for a grow bag garden. So those are cucumbers. I talked about the the fencing I use for the sugar snap peas, and then I want to tell you some about the show and tell that I have for this week. So this is a little different than I did the last few weeks, but I put out a couple of YouTube videos. So this is something to think about too when you're growing, especially in containers. If you're growing in the ground, not as big of a deal, but if you're growing containers, this is something to take into consideration. There are two different types of root systems. Okay, awesome. Yeah, I know sometimes these videos buffer. It's kind of weekend by weekend on how good a cell phone signal I have. We're never gonna have fiber optic up to our house, so it's all over the airwaves. But okay, so I put out a couple of videos this week. There's two different types of root system for plants. There's a taproot, and this past week here, a couple of days ago, I was cleaning up the hoop house. I had some weeds that I had to pull that had crept in underneath the tarp that I have on the ground, and I was kind of amazed because these guys are not small. So these are some tap roots that I pulled that from weeds that I didn't want in my hoop house that they had kind of snuck in on the corner of the where the hoop house is. So I pulled the tarp back and found these guys, but here's a tap root. So this is good to know on some of your plants because if you're going to grow in a grow bag and you know that your plant, the root system for the plant that you want to grow is a tap root like this, and this kind of reminds me of a carrot. That's exactly what I thought when I saw this. So taproot, if you have a plant that primarily puts out a taproot, that's something to think about when you're growing in containers or grow bags. So for me, doing carrots, I do it's a smaller in diameter, but it's a taller grow bag. So the containers can come in different shapes and sizes. So when I'm doing ones that have a long taproot, like those carrots, I'll have a taller, thinner grow bag. So that's taproot. And your second type of root system you're gonna have is fibrous taproot. So this is some grass that was coming into the side of my hoop house also that I pulled out. But you can see the difference between how these two root systems look, taproot and the fibrous. It's just visual reminder of what some of these root systems look like, and something to consider when you're choosing a container for that. It's also good to know what type of root system your plant's going to put down if you're in the situation like where I was at the last house where we didn't have any topsoil. So if I had a shallow raised bed, say 6 inches, and I want to put carrots down, those carrots are going to get down to the B horizon, or the the subsoil right underneath where the topsoil was going to be. They would probably get to that point and stop, because that part of that property was mostly clay and silt. So it's just it's just something to consider. So what I did at that house was I actually went a foot deep, and that was deep enough to do other plants like carrots or basically anything else. So a lot of your vegetable fruiting plants that you traditionally think about a garden, they're going to have a main taproot type system. But like a lot of your favorite plants, like maybe a tomato, as soon as that main root goes down and starts to expand, it's gonna actually have more fibrous root system too. So it's kind of a dual. But I wanted to show you that, just a good visual show and tell of what the difference between a actual taproot and what a fibrous root system looks like. I got one more thing to show you. Well, actually, a few things. These are some new seed varieties that I'm trying this year, and I think I mentioned this a few months ago, but some seed varieties, mainly hybrids, I found over the last few years, sometimes I can get them, sometimes I can't get them. I don't know exactly what's going on. I think it's probably crop failure or something failed and they just couldn't get them out. And I did mention, I'm going to reiterate it here because we're getting into watermelon sowing season here shortly, is that on certain hybrids, certain varieties, just because it has the same name on the seed packet doesn't mean it's going to perform exactly like that same variety did with another company. And I found this out the hard way here last year. Last year I couldn't get this variety, and I was sad because I've been growing this since 2020, but this is called Mini Love. It's a hybrid. I think it was last year or maybe a couple years ago. I couldn't even find this, and uh, it's still this year. It finally showed up, so I was happy about that. But that's a hybrid. So again, if I saved seeds from that, I wouldn't have a Mini Love hybrid. So this is the first year I've tried with territorial seeds. So I think at some point later this summer, after I've had this plant grow out, I'll probably do a review on how this plant performed. And I mentioned, even though that same plant variety may be advertised at a different seed company, the one that I got burned on, I don't want to say burned, I just had poor results, and that was Oregon Spring. So if Johnny's Selected Seed is listening right now, I'd kind of like to know what happened to the Oregon Spring seeds you guys used to sell. Because the first year I tried Oregon Spring tomatoes, and if you're not familiar with Oregon Spring, it's a early growing slicer tomato, which works great here in Minnesota. It was bred Oregon State University years ago. But what happened was Johnny's Selected Seeds, I'm guessing it wasn't popular. That's probably why they discontinued it. But I bought it from another seed company, and I won't tell you who. but I grew them out, and they did not perform well. So I was kind of disappointed about that. But anyway, Mini Love F1 from Territorial this year is the first one for that. Same seed name, but different results from different. Yep. Okay, so Mini Love from Territorial, and then this one I'm trying out this year. I always try a few different varieties every year just to see. I like to expand my library of what I offer. This one's called Minnesota Midget. It's a cantaloupe from Territorial Seed again. I've never grown this before. I've heard good stuff about it, so I'll probably do a review on that later this year also. And then that one's open pollinated heirloom, so that one I can totally save seeds from. And this last one is called Honeycomb F1. It's a honeydew melon from Territorial. So those are ones that I'm trialing this year, and we'll see how they do. I'm gonna be pleasantly optimistic, and if our growing season goes well, then I I anticipate to have some very good reports for you guys. And I think with those ones too, I'll probably do updates on how the plant's growing at different stages of his life, just to do kind of a side by side comparison on my favorites that I do every year. Consider writing to the original supplier and asking them to carry the specific seed again. Oh yeah, so I did one better than that. I love that. I did one better than that. And what I did was 2 months ago. Most gardeners are natural optimists. Yes, yes. I did one better than that. So instead of writing to Johnny's, it was this year too. So I have a neighbor who's about 4 miles that way down gravel road, who has a farm, a market farm. And when I was ordering Johnny's selected seeds here earlier this year, for whatever reason, the my territorial seed rep for Johnny's popped up, and I found out it was my neighbor. So I called him. I said, "Hey, I didn't know you were selling Johnny seeds now." So we met for coffee at the local coffee shop, and yeah, I brought that up, and it was funny because he brought his Johnny's material for the seed catalogs or whatever, and we started talking, and he said, "I have a feeling you're going to be telling me what you need, and you probably know more about the seeds with Johnny's than I do." I'm like, "Well, I could tell you specifically what I need because I'm such a niche grower that I'm looking for dwarf and plants that do very well in containers." So, so we talked mostly about dwarf midgets, containerized varieties, and Johnny's. What I like about Johnny's, and this is not a paid ad for Johnny's. I'm just telling you from my own perspective, is that Renee's. I started with the Renee's in 2020, and that's what they're known for, is container varieties. But as my business has grown, I've had to look at the economics of it because seeds can get expensive, especially when I get into specialized hybrids. So I'm always looking to see, can I buy a larger quantity for a discount? And Johnny's has a lot of the varieties that Renee's or other specialty seed companies have, but I can get them in like bigger bags like this. I can buy a pound of special pea seeds or whatnot that I need. So that's the cool thing about Johnny's, is that it's a larger company, larger scale. I can buy a larger quantity of whatever seed I need for a lower price per seed, and that's worked out very well. But anyway, that's what's going on here at MEG's Edible Landscapes. I appreciate you spending your morning with me, and I look forward to growing with you more this summer. So have a great week.